Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes Deadly Ideologies Edition.
Today we're diving deep into quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong.
Yeah, a book that's had a monumental
Yeah,
and often disturbing impact on history.
it really has.
This little red book, as it's often called, is notorious.
Yeah.
But for those who haven't actually read it, what's the big deal?
Well, it's the distilled essence of Mao Zedong's thinking.
Right.
The leader who reshaped China.
Yeah.
And it's not just random quotes,
Right.
it's a roadmap to his ideology.
Okay.
Organized thematically so readers could apply it to everything.
So it's like a communist handbook straight from the source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that source is important.
Right.
Mao wasn't just an armchair philosopher.
Sure.
He led a revolution
Yeah.
in a nation.
Right.
These ideas weren't abstract.
Yeah.
They were put into practice.
Yeah.
With huge consequences.
Okay, before we get into those consequences.
Let's get a handle on the ideas themselves.
Oh, yeah.
If you had to boil down Mao's thinking, what are the core themes we see running through this book?
Well, it's a mix of empowering and chilling, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
You see this constant emphasis on the power of the masses, the
Yeah.
people, as the driving force of history.
Okay.
But right alongside that
Yeah.
is the absolute authority of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
The need for obedience
Right.
to the party line.
So power to the people.
Right.
But only under the party's very specific guidance.
Exactly.
That already seems like there's some tension there.
Huge tension.
Yeah.
And that plays out in how he views conflict.
Okay.
Class struggle is central to Mao's thinking.
Uh-huh.
It's not something you overcome.
Right.
It's the engine of progress.
Okay.
Even after you win a war, the struggle continues,
Right.
just in different forms.
So even in times of peace,
Yeah.
there's this underlying sense that conflict is inevitable,
Yes.
even necessary.
It's a pretty bleak worldview, if you ask me.
It can be,
Yeah.
but it also ties into his view on revolution.
Okay.
For Mao, revolution isn't just a one-time event. It's
No.
the ultimate tool for change.
Yeah.
He's very clear that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun.
So violence is seen as an inherent part of progress.
Yes.
That's where the deadly ideology part really starts to hit home,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yes, and we'll get into the specific consequences later.
Okay.
But one more key theme to set the stage.
Uh-huh.
His view of enemies, particularly imperial powers.
Right.
Mao famously calls them paper tigers,
Yeah.
looking fearsome but weak underneath.
There's a real sense of defiance there.
Uh-huh.
This belief that even the mightiest powers can be toppled if you understand their weaknesses.
Yeah.
I'm already seeing how this book would have been incredibly motivating,
Absolutely.
even intoxicating for people seeking change.
Absolutely.
But that intoxicating power is also what makes it so dangerous.
Right.
All right,
Hey.
let's get into the text itself. Okay.
The book kicks off with a chapter titled The Communist Party.
Yeah.
No beating around the bush there.
Yep.
Straight to the point.
Yeah.
So is this setting the stage for everything else that follows?
Yes.
Is he laying out why the party is so crucial to his whole ideology?
Exactly. He states very plainly,
Okay.
without the efforts of the Chinese Communist Party, without the Chinese Communists as the mainstay of the Chinese people, China can never achieve independence and liberation or industrialization and the modernization of her agriculture.
Wow.
The party is the foundation. Everything else builds upon that.
It's interesting how he frames it not just as a political party,
Right.
but as essential for the very survival and progress of the nation.
Yeah.
There's no room for alternative paths to development in his view.
None whatsoever.
Okay.
And he hammers this home throughout the chapter,
Yeah.
repeatedly describing the party as the core of leadership,
Right.
the absolute essential element for achieving socialism.
Yeah. He even says the Chinese Communist Party is the core of leadership of the whole Chinese people.
Uh-huh.
Without this core, the cause of socialism cannot be victorious.
There's that unwavering conviction we talked about.
Yeah.
It's striking how he links the party's success with the success of China itself.
Right.
It creates this sense that anyone opposing the party is opposing the nation, almost like a form of patriotism,
Mm-hmm.
but directed at the party.
You're hitting on a key insight there.
Yeah.
It's not just about political control.
Right.
It's about ideological control.
Okay.
The party becomes synonymous with national identity,
Yeah?
with progress itself.
Right.
That's powerful, but also potentially very dangerous.
Because it shuts down any possibility, the debate
Yes.
of exploring alternative paths.
Right.
It's the party's way or the highway, so to speak.
And that leads us into the next chapter,
Okay.
which focuses on one of Mao's most central
Yeah.
and arguably most unsettling concepts,
Uh-huh.
class struggle.
Okay.
He dives deep into this idea,
Yeah.
presenting it not as a problem to be solved,
Right.
but as the fundamental driving force of history.
He has that stark line, right?
Yeah.
Something like, classes struggle, some classes triumph, others are eliminated. Such is history. Such is the history of civilization for thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's almost a glorification of conflict,
Right.
a sense that it's not something to be avoided but embraced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he goes even further,
Okay.
drawing this very clear line between the people, those who support the revolution,
Yeah.
and the enemy, those who resist it.
Right.
It sets up this us versus them mentality that runs through so much of his thinking.
It's a powerful way to motivate people to create a sense of purpose and regency,
Yes.
but it also lays the groundwork for justifying some pretty extreme actions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When you frame everything as a struggle for survival, a battle between good and evil,
Yeah.
it becomes much easier to dehumanize your opponents to justify violence and oppression in the name of the greater good.
We're already seeing how these seemingly abstract ideas could have very real
Yes.
and very deadly consequences when put into practice. It makes you wonder, if struggle is the norm, is there ever any hope for peace in Mao's vision?
That's a good question.
Or is conflict just baked into the system?
That's a question that'll keep coming up as we go deeper into the book. But before we get there, let's look at what Mao proposes as the ultimate goal of this struggle.
Okay.
The communist society.
Right.
Chapter 3 lays out his understanding of socialism and communism,
Yeah.
contrasting them with historical systems like feudalism and capitalism.
Okay, so this is where he starts to paint a picture of what that ideal society would look like.
He does.
Yeah.
And he doesn't hold back, confidently declaring communism
Okay.
the most complete, progressive, revolutionary, and rational system in human history.
Wow.
For Mao, it's not just a different way of organizing society.
Wow.
It's the culmination of human progress.
It's interesting how he frames it not just as a political or economic system,
Right.
but almost as a moral imperative. There's this sense that communism is not just preferable, but inevitable.
Yes.
The natural endpoint of history's unfolding.
Exactly. And he reinforces this with some very vivid imagery,
Check.
contrasting the dynamism and vitality of communism
Yeah.
with the supposed decline and decay of capitalism.
Right.
Capitalism is like a dying person who is sinking fast,
Oh.
while communism represents the youthful vigor of the future.
It's powerful rhetoric, and you can see how it would have been incredibly appealing.
Yes.
Especially to people living in poverty or oppression, yearning for a better world.
Absolutely.
But I'm also struck by the lack of nuance,
Yeah.
the black and white thinking. There's no room for acknowledging the potential downsides or challenges of a communist system.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
Mao's vision is very utopian,
Okay.
very idealistic. And while that can be inspiring, it can also be dangerous because it sets up unrealistic expectations and doesn't provide a framework for dealing with the inevitable complexities and challenges of governing a real-world society.
So even if we set aside the ethical concerns for a moment,
Okay.
there's a pragmatic question here.
Yeah.
Can any system, even communism,
Right.
truly live up to such lofty ideals?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And one that history would ultimately provide a rather tragic answer to.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But before we get to that,
Yeah.
let's see how Mao addresses the inevitable disagreements and conflicts that arise even within a supposedly harmonious communist society.
Right.
Chapter 4, titled The Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People,
Okay.
provides some insight into that.
So it's like a guidebook for navigating disputes within the system.
Yes.
What kind of advice does Chairman Mao offer?
Well, he outlines 6 criteria for distinguishing right from wrong within a socialist society, and they're very telling because they heavily emphasize the party's role.
Yeah.
These criteria are uniting the people, benefiting socialist construction,
Okay.
consolidating the people's democratic dictatorship, consolidating democratic centralism, strengthening the party's leadership, and benefiting international socialist unity.
Okay, so Even when it comes to resolving internal disputes,
Yeah.
the party's dominance is front and center.
It is.
It's not about open debate or finding common ground.
Right.
It's about aligning with the party's interpretation of what's best for the collective.
Exactly. And he makes this crystal clear, stating, of these 6 criteria, the most important are the socialist path and the leadership of the party.
Yeah.
Individual voices and dissenting opinions are ultimately subordinate to the party's interpretation of what's right and wrong.
It's almost like a preemptive shutdown of any meaningful dissent.
It is.
It's unity on the party's terms.
Right.
Which isn't really unity at all, is it?
It highlights the inherent contradiction in Mao's thinking, empowering the masses while simultaneously demanding absolute obedience to the party.
Right.
It's a tension that runs throughout the book and would have devastating consequences in practice.
Well, this deep dive is already proving to be a lot more complex and a lot more disturbing than I initially anticipated.
Yeah.
And we're only 4 chapters in.
We've barely scratched the surface.
Oh, boy.
But buckle up, because things are about to get even more intense as we delve into Mao's views on war, peace, and revolution in the next few chapters.
All right, bring it on.
Okay. Picking up where we left off, Chapter 5 dives into one of the most controversial aspects of Mao's thought, his perspective on war and peace.
Given everything we've discussed so far, I'm guessing this isn't going to be a pacifist treatise.
You'd be right.
Okay.
Mao is very clear that he sees war as an unavoidable, even necessary tool for advancing revolution.
Right.
He famously states, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." It's a chilling statement, but one that reflects his own experiences leading a revolutionary movement.
So for Mao, violence isn't just a last resort.
Right.
It's almost a core principle.
Yeah, it's baked into his whole approach to achieving political change.
That's the unsettling truth. He distinguishes between just wars, which he sees as progressive, and unjust wars, which hinder progress.
Yes.
But the criteria for making that judgment are, of course, highly subjective and open to manipulation.
Absolutely.
It's easy to imagine how that kind of framework could be used to justify all sorts of atrocities, especially when combined with his emphasis on class struggle and the need to eliminate enemies. It's like he's creating a moral justification for violence.
You're right to be concerned.
Yeah.
And those concerns become even more acute when we look at how he talks about achieving peace.
Okay.
For Mao, lasting peace is only possible through solidarity with other socialist countries, support for national liberation movements, and a cautious, even adversarial approach to dealing with imperial powers.
It's a very ideologically driven view of peace.
Yeah.
It's not about finding common ground or compromise. It's about aligning with the right side of history as he defines it.
Exactly.
Right.
And it sets the stage for the next chapter, which focuses on this provocative concept of the paper tiger.
Right.
Mao uses this metaphor to describe seemingly powerful enemies, particularly imperial powers, arguing that they're actually weak at their core.
There's a real sense of defiance there, almost a David and Goliath mentality.
Yes.
It's like he's saying, don't be intimidated by their size or their bluster. If you understand their weaknesses, you could bring them down.
It's a powerful message, especially for people who feel oppressed or marginalized.
Right. And he backs it up with historical examples.
He does.
Pointing to figures like Hitler and the Tsar of Russia.
Yes.
Both of whom were ultimately overthrown, despite seeming invincible at the time.
That's right.
He even applies it to the United States.
Yes.
Predicting that it, too, will eventually be overthrown by the people.
Yeah.
Given the context of the Cold War, that must have been a pretty audacious statement.
It was, but it speaks to Mao's unwavering belief in the power of the people.
Right.
Especially when guided by the correct ideology, which, of course, he believed was his own.
It's interesting how he combines this faith in the masses with a deep distrust of anything outside the communist sphere.
Right.
It creates this very insular worldview.
It does.
One that sees enemies everywhere and justifies extreme measures to combat them.
And that leads us to Chapter 7, which is a call to action.
Okay.
Dare to struggle and dare to win. This chapter is all about inspiring revolutionary zeal, urging people to embrace struggle and fight for their vision of a better world.
He had that rousing quote, right?
He does.
Something like, "People of the world, unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors and all their running dogs. People of the world, be courageous, dare to fight, defy difficulties, and advance wave upon wave. Then the whole world will belong to the people. Monsters of all kinds shall be destroyed." It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
but also incredibly dangerous when you consider the context we've already established.
It's a potent mix of inspiration and incitement.
Right. He acknowledges the desire for peace.
He does.
But quickly follows that up with the assertion that violence is sometimes necessary,
right,
even inevitable to achieve it.
It's that dangerous logic we talked about earlier.
Yeah. The ends justify the means, and violence becomes a legitimate tool for advancing the cause. It's chilling to see how easily he slips between advocating for peace and glorifying struggle.
And it gets even more chilling when we move into Chapter 8, which focuses on his concept of people's war.
Okay.
This is where he lays out his strategy for waging revolution. And it's not just about traditional military tactics. It's about mobilizing the entire population for the war effort.
So it's a total war blurring the lines between civilians and soldiers.
Yes.
It sounds terrifyingly similar to some of the totalitarian regimes we've seen in history.
The parallels are undeniable, and he uses some very vivid imagery to describe this approach, comparing the masses to a force that can surround and burn to death aggressors, like a mad bull crashing into a ring of flames.
It's a powerful, albeit disturbing image.
Yes.
What's the strategic thinking behind this people's war approach? Is it just about overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers, or is there more to it?
It's partly about numbers, yes, but it's also about creating a sense of national unity, a shared purpose that transcends individual differences. He believed that by involving everyone in the struggle, you create a force that's far more resilient and determined than any traditional army.
It's almost like he's weaponizing the very population, turning them into a tool for achieving his political goals. And given his emphasis on ideological purity and obedience to the party, it's easy to see how this could lead to some very dark outcomes.
That's the danger of this kind of thinking. It can easily slip from empowering the people to controlling them, from inspiring them to sacrificing them for the supposed good of the cause.
Okay, so we've got this vision of a mobilized population all united in this struggle for revolutionary change. What about the army itself? What role does it play in Mao's vision?
That's the focus of Chapter 9, The People's Army. And it's not just about fighting, it's about shaping society. He sees the army as an extension of the party, a tool for not just winning wars, but also for advancing the revolution and building a new socialist order.
He makes that very clear statement, right? Something like, without a people's army, the people have nothing. It's not just about defense. It's about the very existence and security of the people as defined by the party.
Exactly. And he envisions a role for the army that extends far beyond the battlefield. They're not just soldiers. They're educators, organizers, and builders of the new society. They're involved in everything from propaganda to production.
It's interesting how he blurs the lines between these different roles.
creating this all-encompassing force that permeates every aspect of life. It's like the army becomes this embodiment of the party's will, a tool for shaping not just the physical landscape, but also the minds of the people.
It's a very totalitarian vision,
Yeah.
and one that would have profound implications for how the army was used both during the revolution and in the decades that followed. But to truly understand the depth of Mao's ideology, we need to move beyond these early chapters,
Okay.
which focus primarily on the revolutionary struggle,
Right.
and into the later sections where he lays out his vision for a communist society
Okay.
in much greater detail.
So we're transitioning from the battlefield to the building blocks of a new social order.
Yes.
What are some of the key themes that emerge in these later chapters?
Well, one of the most prominent is leadership,
Okay.
and specifically the type of leadership that Mao believed was essential for guiding a communist society. Chapter 10 sets the stage for this discussion, highlighting the qualities that he saw as essential in a leader, particularly within the party.
Given his emphasis on the party's authority, I'm guessing this isn't going to be a treatise on democratic leadership.
You'd be right.
Okay.
While he does talk about the importance of collective leadership
Uh-huh.
and the need for leaders to connect with the masses,
Right.
he's very clear that the party's ideology must always be the guiding principle.
So it's collective leadership, but within the very strict confines of the party line.
Yes.
No room for independent thought or dissenting opinions, it seems.
Not really. He warns against arrogance and complacency,
Okay.
urging leaders to remain humble and connected to the people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, loyalty to the party and its ideology trumps all else.
Very top-down approach to leadership.
It is.
One that emphasizes obedience and conformity over creativity and critical thinking.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much genuine progress is possible within such a rigid system.
That's a question that would plague China throughout Mao's rule.
Right. But to
To understand his vision more fully,
Yes.
we need to delve into one of the most important concepts in his ideology,
Okay.
the mass line.
The mass line.
I've heard of the mass line, but I'm not entirely clear on what it means.
How does Mao explain it in the book?
Well, he dedicates several chapters to this concept,
Okay.
emphasizing its importance for guiding the party's work and ensuring that it remains connected to the needs and aspirations of the people.
Okay, so it's about staying in touch with the masses, understanding their concerns. It sounds almost democratic in a way.
There are elements of that, yes.
Okay.
The mass line involves gathering ideas from the people, analyzing them through the lens of the party's ideology, and then translating those ideas into policies and actions that are then tested and refined through further engagement with the masses.
So it's a cyclical process of learning and action with the people as the starting point. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
But I'm already seeing potential pitfalls.
You're right to be skeptical.
Okay.
While the idea of deriving knowledge and guidance from the masses might sound appealing,
It's important to remember that in Mao's system, the party ultimately controls this process. They decide which ideas are worth listening to, how those ideas are interpreted, and how they are translated into action.
so it's not really about empowering the people.
Right.
It's about using their input to legitimize the party's decisions
Yes.
and strengthen its control.
That's the cynical view.
Right.
And it's one that many historians subscribe to.
Yeah, the mass line in practice often became a tool for propaganda and manipulation rather than genuine engagement with the people.
Unfortunately, that's true.
It's another example of that recurring tension we've seen throughout the book.
Yes.
The rhetoric of empowering the masses
Mm-hmm.
while simultaneously tightening the party's grip on power.
And it's the tension that would have devastating consequences,
Yeah.
as we'll see when we delve into the specific policies and campaigns that were implemented under Mao's rule.
Okay, so we've got leadership and the mass line.
Yes.
What else is central to Mao's vision for a communist society?
Well, one recurring theme is the importance of self-reliance
Okay.
and arduous struggle.
Yeah.
He believed that the Chinese people,
Right.
and especially party members, needed to be prepared to face challenges head-on, to rely on their own strength and perseverance to overcome obstacles.
It's very Stoic philosophy.
It is.
Very much in line with the traditional Confucian values of hard work and discipline.
Right.
But I'm also sensing a potential for this to be taken to extremes.
Yes.
Especially within the context of a revolutionary movement.
You're right to be concerned.
Okay.
And those concerns would prove to be tragically valid,
Yeah.
as we'll see when we discuss the Great Leap Forward.
Okay.
A campaign driven by this belief in the power of human will to overcome any obstacle,
Right.
even the laws of nature.
It's already clear that these seemingly abstract ideas, when put into practice on a national scale,
Yes.
can have devastating consequences. It makes you wonder how much of the suffering that China endured under Mao's rule was a direct result of these ideas,
Right.
and how much was due to other factors like political ambition. Yeah. Or the realities of governing a vast and complex nation.
That's the question that historians continue to debate.
Right.
But there's no denying that Mao's ideology, as laid out in this book, played a significant role in shaping the course of events,
Right.
both for better and for worse.
Well, this deep dive is certainly living up to its name.
Mm-hmm.
We're going way beyond just summarizing the book.
Yes, we are.
We're really getting into the heart of Mao's thinking.
Yeah.
And it's both fascinating and deeply unsettling.
And we're not done yet.
Oh, no.
There's still much to unpack,
Okay.
including Mao's views on education culture and the role of intellectuals in a communist society.
Right.
Buckle up, because the journey gets even more complex and even more disturbing from here.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
We've been exploring this idea of self-reliance, of overcoming obstacles through sheer willpower. But I can't help but think that there are limits to what even the most determined people can achieve, especially when facing challenges like famine or natural disasters.
You've hit on a crucial point, and it's one that tragically played out during the Great Leap Forward, a campaign launched by Mao in the late 1950s to rapidly transform China's economy from agrarian to industrial.
This was one of those disastrous consequences you mentioned earlier, right? I remember reading about the widespread famine and economic chaos that ensued.
It was a catastrophe of immense proportions, driven by unrealistic targets, misguided policies, and a suppression of dissenting voices. The Great Leap Forward resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people.
It's hard to fathom that kind of suffering, and it's a stark reminder that even the most well-intentioned ideologies, when divorced from reality and implemented through authoritarian means,
can have horrific consequences.
That's the dark side of Mao's legacy, and it's something that we can't shy away from if we want to truly understand the impact of his ideas.
It's a sobering reminder that ideas have power, and that power can be used for good or for evil.
Exactly, and it brings us to another key theme that emerges in these later chapters, the role of intellectuals in a communist society. Mao had a complex and often contradictory relationship with intellectuals, recognizing their importance for national development while simultaneously fearing their potential to challenge the party's authority.
So he needed their expertise, but he didn't trust their independence.
That's the tension.
Yeah.
He believed that intellectuals needed to be re-educated to align their thinking with the party's ideology and to serve the needs of the masses rather than pursuing their own individual interests.
It sounds like a recipe for stifling creativity and critical thinking. How did this play out in practice?
Well, it led to campaigns like the 100 Flowers campaign, where intellectuals were initially encouraged to express their views openly, followed by a harsh crackdown on those who dared to criticize the party.
So a brief moment of openness, followed by a brutal return to repression.
That's the pattern we see throughout Mao's rule, and it would culminate in one of the most devastating periods in Chinese history, the Cultural Revolution.
The Cultural Revolution, another one of those dark chapters we can't ignore.
Yeah.
Uh, I know it was a time of immense social and political upheaval, but what exactly was Mao trying to achieve?
He claimed that he was trying to purge the party and society of bourgeois elements and to revitalize the revolution. But in reality, it was a power struggle, a way for Mao to reassert his authority after the failures of the Great Leap Forward.
So it was about consolidating his own power, even if it meant turning the country upside down and unleashing chaos.
That's the tragic truth. The Cultural Revolution saw young people mobilized as Red Guards, attacking anyone perceived as disloyal to Mao, from teachers and intellectuals to party officials and even their own families.
It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
How could something like that happen?
It's a complex question, but part of the answer lies in the ideas we've been exploring in this deep dive. Mao's emphasis on class struggle, the need to eliminate enemies, the glorification of violence as a tool for change. All of these ideas created a climate where such atrocities became possible.
It's a chilling reminder of the dark potential that lurks within even the most seemingly idealistic ideologies.
And it's why we can't simply dismiss quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong as a historical artifact. The ideas contained in this book had a profound and lasting impact on China, shaping its political system, its culture, and its relationship with the world.
So as we close the book on this deep dive, what's the one takeaway, the nugget of insight that you hope sticks with our listeners?
I think for me, it's the importance of critical thinking when engaging with any ideology, no matter how appealing or well-intentioned it may seem. We have to be willing to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the practical implications of those ideas, both in theory and in practice.
It's a lesson that's especially relevant today in a world where ideologies of all stripes are competing for our attention and allegiance.
Indeed, we must learn from the past, from the mistakes of those who came before us, if we want to create a better future.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. How do you think Mao's legacy continues to shape China and the world today? Thanks for joining us on this exploration of quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. It's been a thought-provoking and at times unsettling journey, but one that's essential for understanding the complexities of the 20th century and the forces that continue to shape our world today.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.